Right, Sport Hawke's Bay.
Madam Chair, that's on page 33 of 36 of the officer's response.
The Sport Hawke's Bay one is probably a little bit different because this actually submits on the establishment of a regional fund, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And so, Madam Chair, you notice that there was no officer's recommendation on this, but I will propose an officer's recommendation that discussion on this be deferred until the outcome of the local government reorganisation proposal is known.
Mm. Do you wish to speak to that? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried.
Do exactly the same thing with the adultery's request for whole funding of regional facilities. It's inappropriate to consider that in advance of the well-made decision.
Oh, well, this is on that regional fund, isn't it? I think we've dealt with that in one fell swoop. Right. Yes, if we do Taiao Forum, who've asked for $25,000 a year. Do we have a funding source for this? There's no longer a community bucket, so can someone tell me if this was to be funded, where would that money come from?
It would either come out of
Page 34.
it would either come out of rates or it would come out of some other area in our budget that we would do less of if we deemed this to be more important. And he certainly put that view forward. So, Ian, you have an opinion? No?
Could I ask a question, please? Just a little bit of history, I suppose. Coming from across the road, we had a community development fund where we had an X amount of dollars, which was a contestable fund. And it just seems as though this would be the fund that this organisation would apply to for such a thing. So why haven't we got one? And what is there a history behind that, please?
Yeah, there is. I'm going to ask Mr. Drury to address that.
Myself and the Chief Executive, she currently deals with that area, but we used to have a fund for a number of years, and then the council made a decision that it was better not to have the fund. You had a queue up of people that had been to the territorials prior to coming here. So I think the feeling at that time, which I think was about 3 years ago, or longer, that we'd be better not to have a fund. I think there's money for strategic alliances, but that's a different flavour.
So there was a back in several LTPs ago, there was a fund of $120,000, and it was allocated among 5 groups, but it was allocated for a 3-year term. So in effect, although it was, you could argue it was contestable, in essence it wasn't, because it was sewn up by those council's contracts on those for 3 years.
For those 5, if you don't mind.
Sustaining Hawke's Bay Trust, who now have come under another name. That was Ms. Thompson.
Yeah, there was several environmental groups. I can't remember. Drew's probably sitting there trying to think about them too. At the last LTP, the council decided to use that money instead of having the contestable funding, to use that money for its strategic alliances. In other words, to formally engage with, for example, with Massey University, to have more formal dialogue with a number of other stakeholder groups, and to have some of that money set aside also for some of the initiatives that we wanted to undertake with Maori groups as well. So it was very much directed towards our strategic alliances rather than as a contestable fund.
Councillor Bevan?
I think during the discussion or the presentation from this group, I think that the chair made a point that this may not simplify but complicate our relationships with these groups, because the component groups were making their own quite separate submissions, and I thought that sounds right to me, and
I'm a little bit concerned. I don't know enough about this group, to be honest, to know whether there's a worthwhile contribution to make to them or not. But it does strike me that it might lead to added complications rather than simplifications in terms of our relationship and inputs.
So, Madam Chair, I could perhaps comment that the original forum did include agencies like Fish and Game, but I don't believe that Fish and Game are necessarily represented there at the moment. Like you, I'm not completely familiar with who's there in terms of the composition of the group today. That's something that we're not clear on. But from a statutory perspective, if those groups were also part of an umbrella, it wouldn't mitigate our responsibility to go and consult directly with those agencies in policy or consenting matters. So it potentially does add that complication.
Could speak to it a little?
No, I'm sorry, ask a question?
I have a question.
Yes, Councillor Huron.
So if any of the Taiao representatives are doing a bit of work for the regional council, is there a provision in there for them to be able to invoice for their time direct to some of your staff? Liz?
No, I'm sorry. I'm not clear on your question. Sorry, is the question if they were doing work for us and we'd commission them to do the work? I guess if we had a contract, yes, but if not, like if, for example, if they're working with us on things like the biodiversity strategy, they would be there in their capacity as a participant in the group. But what we typically do for those groups is for the people who don't have a source of income, we offer a meeting fee, but we don't necessarily pay them for their time per se. Perhaps just one other comment I would probably point out, just in response to their submission as well. They did make a point that we do have other agencies whom we consult with and work with, and I think they refer particularly to the primary sector and that they're there and often in a paid capacity, and that's correct. I guess the difference is that those primary sector groups do have paid staff that they have funded through a levy payment system or that type of thing. So it is a user pays type setup for the end participants as well. The primary sector people who are involved are paying a levy to fund an office and have staff appear on their basis. It is that model is something that the environmental sector could explore at some point in time, as well as these sorts of requests.
Well, that's what happens when Fish and Game come and see you, isn't it? Fish and Game pay staff people.
Fish and Game do, yeah.
So I've got a question. What benefit are we going to get out of this for $25,000 and a rates increase? And because I can't see anything at this point.
Staff got an answer?
Well, I guess thinking about the immediate benefits is if there is a forum that exists and it brings together all of the groups with a shared interest and a shared view on particular issues, and if we could consider them as a whole and take a submission, for example, from the group or a collective and manage that one process instead of, let's say, a dozen, if there are a dozen participants, that would be the benefit it would bring. But I'm not sure that we could legally do that we would still need to deal with the 12, if there were 12 groups who we had an obligation to consult with, we would probably still need to consult with them irrespective of the single group. But certainly the benefit, so that's a kind of a consultation thing. I guess it's an early space where we can have those conversations by bringing them all together, but it doesn't deal with the broader issue of then the formal processes.
So
Question from
my question is, I just want
Councillor
a better understanding of who these people are. We only had 10 minutes and it's the first time I'd heard of them. So they're a group here and they span out and they have all these other people, so they're a forum of like interest environmental groups. Is that what they are?
If you would like somebody who knows the answer, I'll respond, but
yeah.
I'm not
Can-
committed
can-
to because
well-
that could be a comment.
I wanted to. I'm a little bit confused about what we're doing here. I'm not clear whether we're having a just question and answer or whether we're having a conversation to enlarge our knowledge. And I was a bit disappointed that you cut councillor Belford
Well, I
off when he
think-
can probably add to our knowledge
I
here because
think
he
that-
might know a bit more about the
I think
group
that,
than the rest of us.
They have made presentations to the staff and to council as to who they are, and so I think that Mr Maxwell would be able to tell you. We did hear that one of the groups under them doesn't feel that they're not represented. Mr Renouf was here the other day and specifically asked a question that he doesn't really work through that group, he works individually, so.
So just going to part 2, excuse me, page I-53, at the top of their submission. The forum is non-political and at present includes 3 branches of Forest and Bird: Napier, Hastings, Havelock North, Central Hawke's Bay, Sustaining Hawke's Bay Trust, Baywatch, Guardians of, I think it's supposed to be Guardians of Hawke's Bay Fisheries, Te Raupu Kaitiaki o Te Wai Māori, Operation Pātiki, and a number of individuals not affiliated to any particular organisation. So those are the parties that they've listed, which, from our perspective, certainly is a good group, a core group, but isn't all of the environmental groups that we would deal with. And you've heard from a number of them over the course of these submissions.
Mike, sorry.
Yeah,
Question.
by way of
Yep.
information, the 2 Maori groups, there are Des Ratana and Paul
My question is, when it comes to stakeholder group, do we work just through the Child Forum, or are those other groups also at the table?
Well, all of those groups are typically involved in various places. Forest and Bird's a good example, where we have Forest and Bird representatives from all the branches usually involved in most of our processes, rather than a single representative from the Taiao Forum.
Okay, so we are getting multiple representation. Right. Okay, are there any other questions, clarification around this, in which case we'll move to a recommendation.
I move no
And-
change.
That we accept the request for $25,000.
Right, moved that we accept the request, and this will be general rate funded. Is that correct?
Unless it could be found in the existing several $100,000 strategic alliance budget.
Is there a second for that motion? Right, Councillor Barker, do you wish to speak to that, Councillor Belford?
Yes, I do. I've been to every meeting of this group since its formation, so I have some knowledge of what they're dealing with, who they are, and what they're trying to accomplish. Just like with the pan-sector group, they are not seeking to substitute in any of the normal decision-making processes, consultative processes, et cetera, any more than we would say Hawke's Bay fruit growers or the Hort folks or anyone else is not participating in every task force, every working party, every submission process that goes before this council. So they're not expecting to substitute for anyone. The only paid environmental voice in Hawke's Bay is Forest and Bird. All these other people, and those of you who have chaired stakeholder groups, participate in stakeholder groups, realize that it's basically the same people, you could fit them all around this table basically, who participate in our processes from a policy-making standpoint. There are hundreds, thousands of people who are happy to go out and plant trees and cuddle lizards and so forth, and do their part in that respect to contribute to the betterment of Hawke's Bay's environment. There are not a lot of people who are prepared to spend the time to inform themselves about the policy issues in front of us and participate in a serious way in that process. This organization is where those folks gather on a regular basis to try to understand what the hell's going on, to try to deploy their resources with some efficiency to the best they can, to keep track of what all is coming through the pipeline here. And I think the people around this table are more aware than anyone as to what the volume of stuff is that comes through that pipeline, all of which has to be addressed by a group of basically a group of hardy 36 or so volunteers. They're in this because of their passions, their belief, their values in these issues, not because some trade association is paying them to be at the table. And so what they ask for is $25,000 to have some money, to have someone who can coordinate what this group does, help monitor all of this traffic that is flowing through the pipeline, help organize the limited resources they do have to be able to participate intelligently. This council has never, in the time I've been watching it, has never invited the leadership of the environmental community to come in for a meeting. Never. The only time it has happened is when Colin Crombie, with a wallet sticking out of his back pocket, demanded and pounded on the fist on a table to have a meeting of these organizations with Andrew Newman to talk about the dam. It's the only time that group has ever sat around this table. And we can find plenty of time to sit around the table with every other interest group in Hawke's Bay. And so here we are presenting ourselves as the leading environmental decision-making body in Hawke's Bay, and we haven't figured out a way to engage systematically with the volunteer leadership of the environmental community in this district. I think it's appalling. And so now they come along and say, you know, for $25,000, we can have a coordinator who can help us get the job done that our constituencies are looking to us to do. And you all know, whether it's sports, the creative sector, whatever sector it is, there's a very thin layer of people at the top who make everything happen. And these people get burned out, and two of them go away. That's the end of that's the end of it. So to me, $25,000 invested into Taiao is kind of chump change to pay some respect to the role that we want these people to play. I went to 2 long-term plan consultation meetings that had 3 people at them collectively in Hastings. 3 nights later, I went to a meeting that these people organized, and there were 15 people there who networked to the entire leadership of the environmental community who wanted to know what was in our long-term plan and what its implications are. That's how this group should be used. That's how it could be used. It was a hell of a lot more productive spending my time that night than it was watching, 8 staff people parade around with their charts and flip charts to show them to one person in one case and 2 persons in the other case. That's the value of having some degree of organization capability at the disposal of these people. That's why I support giving them $25,000.
Councillor Barker.
I agree with that. It's a great presentation. I love the power and the passion of the man and his advocacy for the group.
Any other speakers? Yes, Councillor Graham.
This is just proof of Rex not being even predetermined, because I came here, I didn't understand this group. I would have, without that explanation from Councillor Belford, I would have voted against this, but I have been persuaded by the debate, and so I will be voting for it.
Any other speakers? Well, I'm going to take this opportunity and I'm going to be speaking against this. We have, and I really have to address any suggestion that if you have money, as one of the environmental groups had somebody who was well heeled, that they buy their way in. I'm sorry, that is extremely insulting to anybody and anyone that is partaking in it. They should be considered whether they have money or don't have money, and I have never known of any evidence whatsoever that this council actually, the suggestion is, should take bribes. I find that quite disturbing. However, I am going to address the matter. I am going to address the meeting. When you have to refer to somebody that they walk in with a wallet in the back pocket and so get listened to, I'm sorry, that is just deliberately making suggestions which are unacceptable. The Taiao Forum is an umbrella group. They have been involved at every level since their inception with stakeholder groups. They have been around the table, they've been invited to be around the table, and they've had that. There are a lot of other groups there that are also there in their own right and continue to want to be there in their own right, and there's no question that they get funding. So I think that this is, there are a lot of groups out there who participate and contribute to a lot of our processes, and a lot of them have been around this council in the past requesting funding, and we realise that for any volunteer group, seeking funding is a difficulty, but there is no justification of one group having funding over another, and therefore I'm sorry, I am going to vote against this. So, yes.
I'll also take the opportunity to speak.
Can I, just talk,
Sorry.
Mr Mahi first, thank you.
A point of clarification, Councillor Melvin said, moved it to be funding out of rates if there wasn't another avenue. Was to staff, is there another avenue?
The only one I think Councillor Belford mentioned was strategic alliance, and perhaps the Chief Executive should comment on that.
So that's been cut back from $120,000 to $76,000 for this coming year, and has been allocated towards in three areas: local authority shared services, Massey University, and iwi initiatives. So the money has been allocated. Yeah.
I think several meetings ago, we carried
thank you.
forward $120,000 out of that fund into the
Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not too fussed about what pot the money comes from. I'm not like Councillor Graham. I probably would not have supported this until I had a fuller understanding, and it's just a shame that we didn't get that understanding of the function of this group and what it represents earlier in our discussion, because it might have made the discussion a bit shorter. I think you had an entirely inappropriate and incorrect understanding of what Councillor Belford meant by the wallet in the back pocket. What he was talking about was a rich person, not a rich person making a bribe. And I think the rest of us around the table understood that without having to be explained. So I'm going to support this motion.
Look, Taiao is a commendable group, getting those sort of people together who are like thinking. I think that's fine, and I think that would happen most probably in a natural situation anyway. There are other groups, of course, who are not in that particular group, who also come to us. Despite Councillor Belford's passionate appeal to us on this one for the $25,000, I think we've got to be a bit pragmatic about the giving of that sort of money just to groups that are formed within the community. I think we have to be very careful, because what has been pointed out, these groups are going to come to us individually anyway. We have a statutory responsibility to consult with them anyway. Until this Taiao actually speaks as one voice for all these groups, and they give up their right to actually speak, and it's only Taiao, then I would be very much inclined not to support this.
Councillor Dick.
Madam Chair, I just don't believe we should be funding advocacy and lobby groups or individuals. No, so no more than that.
There are no further speakers. Councillor Belford, would you like to sum up?
Yes, again, as you would have noted, none of these other groups that you're worried about came forward in this last funding round and asked for money. The only one that did was the designated hitter for all of these groups, Taiao. The groups that are behind Taiao, which is, by the way, open invitation to any of the environmental groups in the community, they self-select, because not all the environmental groups in the community are interested in the policy process. There are a lot of groups out there that are perfectly happy to be involved in other kinds of hands-on environmental work, and that's not what this organization is intended to do. This organization is intended to try to have a coordinated approach to what are the various policy forums in which the environmental voice should be heard, and how do we use limited resources available to these volunteer organizations to do that. So none of these people are paid, and none of them have asked you for any money. Taiao is the organization that is asking for some support here to play that role. It's as simple as that. As I say, we bend over backwards to facilitate a whole variety of other forums through which interest groups get the ear of counselors and the staff to influence our policy process. And most of those other interests are being represented by people who are on payrolls to do what they do. In the environmental community, that is not the case, with literally one exception, and that's Fish and Game. So to me, this is, as I said before, just I see it as basically barely a gesture to say to these folks, yes, we want you at the table. We know you put in a hell of a lot of time out of your own pocket and budgets to play the role you do. As an environmental organization, we value your participation and we would like to facilitate it.
Right, we'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? No. Right, I'll call for a division on that. All those in favour, please raise their right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4. The casting vote will go on no change to the plan.
Madam Chair, seeing we've got quite a lot to get through, could people try to observe standing orders requirement on speaking time? 10 minutes and moving, 5 minutes.
I was keeping an eye on that, and I
Okay.
have been very close
Thank
to
you.
trying to. Yes.